Sup fellow degenerates, it's your boy Raw and welcome back to the channel, though if you're new here then hi, hello, howdy-o, nice to have you. I'm going to level with you. I hate how a lot of people in the art community talk about and treat those who suffer from mental illness, and also how the topic of mental health in general is broached. I hate how people who express their pain safely through their art are policed by others that advocate for censorship at the barest hint of uncomfortable themes. And finally, I hate how those with mental health issues or past trauma are subjected to a standard in which we are simultaneously demonized and infantilized for simply depicting our experiences through our art. I've had a lot of super hot spicy takes and opinions on this particular subject for a very long time, so now seems like as good a time as ever to really just dive in and explain how I feel. Thus, I want to issue a huge content warning for lengthy discussion of mental health topics in relation to art. Before I get into all of the serious stuff though, I want to stop and take a moment to thank Boning for being a member on Ko-Fi. If you're able to and want to support me monetarily, then my Ko-Fi is down in the card link below. You could either make a one-time donation with a value of your choosing, or you could become a member for some extra perks, such as commission discounts, access to my work in progress art, and the benefit of having your name featured in videos. If you'd also like to order a commission, which are still open, then you can find my prices and terms of service on the commission terms page in my card. To order one, you just need to DM me on any one of my socials. All of that shameless self-promo out of the way, let's get into the topic at hand. Some of you may be unfamiliar with what this video is talking about, especially if you don't really frequent the drama side of the art community, so let me explain. Over the years, a lot of artists who choose to depict mental health issues, self-harm, self-deletion, trauma, and other related themes in their art have been heavily criticized by the art commentary community, and even just by passers-by, for supposedly misrepresenting the issues that they choose to depict. Many people have been harassed endlessly, or sometimes even cancelled for simply coping through their art. A lot of the time, the criticism that they receive is contradictory. There is one side that always proclaims that doing so much as simply creating something with dark and taboo subject matter is romanticizing and glorifying it, and then there is another side that in turn always proclaims that depicting these things are demonizing those who struggle with those issues or past experiences. Heck, sometimes these sides are even the same, believe it or not. I've seen people look at the same piece of dark art of someone else and somehow read it as both a glorification and a demonization of mental health issues. Not only do these people like to say that creating dark work is immoral, but many people advocate for the complete and total censorship of it. Many demand that people stop creating the art and works in which they used to cope. Some are even dogmatic and intense enough about it to encourage those in agreement with them to repeatedly report others to try and get it taken down. And a staggering amount of people are quick to blame the work that they arbitrarily deemed as immoral and its creator for harming others who see it. And you know what I think? I think all of that is a ripe crock of shit, and despite the stated noble intentions of many of these acts and beliefs, actually stems from ableism, whether conscious or unconscious, and narrow-mindedness. Before I get into why I feel like a lot of this is guided by ableism, I want to talk about censorship for a second. There has been debate about censorship and whether or not it's appropriate for a long time in many different communities, and the art community is no different. The whole mind-numbing pro-ship versus anti-ship debate is one that is entirely about censorship and whether or not censoring things that are deemed immoral or distasteful is okay or not. I do realize that the pro and anti-ship debate thing is primarily about, well, ships and sexual content, but antis also tend to advocate against the depiction of mental health topics and just other taboo or dark subjects in general, so I think that it's important to mention here. The anti-side argues that depicting dark content is always immoral and is equivalent to endorsement, whereas the pro-shitter side argues that depiction is never endorsement. Both of them are incorrect. Whether or not something is endorsement is really just a case-by-case basis. It's not as simple as everything is okay or nothing is okay. Antis are wrong when they claim that all questionable content is endorsement, just like pro-shitters are wrong when they claim that none of it is. The black and white view really just doesn't apply to something so nuanced and subjective and individual. With that being said, the argument is often not just about whether or not certain types of content are inherently immoral, but it's also about whether or not they should be censored. And this is where I piss off a bunch of people by taking a firm stance against censorship. I personally believe that, even if a piece of content is an endorsement of something bad, it should not be disallowed from existing, nor should it be required to be censored. This is with the exception of illegal or exploitative content, of course, like lolly, shota, real disgusting content featuring children or animals, etc. If it's content that violates and breaks the law, then censorship is completely fair and understandable, just want to make that clear. However, outside of illegal content, I completely disavow censorship, and I think that advocating for more of it is restrictive and anti-art. This is not to say that something can't be criticized for being problematic, by the way. I think that's perfectly fine, and I've even done it. But I don't think that such content should be forcibly censored. There is a big and important difference between saying that you don't like something and then saying that it shouldn't be allowed to exist. For example, I guess, I don't like Hell of a Boss, and recently I criticized it in a video. I talked about how I believe that the writers are unintentionally romanticizing and glorifying a coercive relationship. However, just because I criticized it does not mean that I think that it should be censored or taken down, nor does it mean that I think that the people who like it or made it are evil, immoral individuals who are pro-abuse or something. I just have problems with some of the writing and portrayal of certain subjects. Swinging this back around to the topic of mental illnesses in art, a lot of people demand that work featuring heavy mental health subjects should be similarly censored. They demand that people remove their work. Sometimes they even demand that such work should not be allowed to be created in the first place because it's either romanticizing or demonizing those with mental health issues. And you know what, Gorge? Even when you might be correct in saying that something might be either glorification or condemnation of mental illness, that does not mean that whoever made it has to censor it. It does not mean that they are required to remove it. It does not mean that they have to kowtow down to your opinions and demands. Even if what they made is problematic, it should not be forcibly censored, nor should the creator be disallowed from making it. Now don't get me wrong, you can criticize the work, you can judge it, you can express your distaste with how these intense subjects are broached. In fact, I'd encourage respectful criticism about problematic aspects in art as long as that criticism does not attack the character of the creator. But being able to criticize it does not mean that the work itself should be forced into removal and that the creator of it should be harassed and cancelled. Whether or not a creator chooses to remove their work should be up to them, not you. It is their prerogative to do what they want with their own art, not yours. With my thoughts on censorship out of the way, I want to discuss what is, in my opinion, the highly offensive and ableist criticism that I often see levied against mentally ill people depicting their own experiences in their art. I want to clarify that, again, not all criticism against this kind of thing is completely wrong or incorrect. Sometimes people do, in fact, create insensitive or inaccurate portrayals of serious topics in their art. I think that most people probably have made mistakes in that department, especially when it comes to a lot of younger creators. I think that it's fine to gently and respectfully criticize something like this, especially when a creator might not even realize that they've made something insensitive. However, fair and balanced criticism meant to help is not the norm. The norm is people aggressively telling mentally ill people that they're uninformed about, misrepresenting, and demonizing people with their own mental illnesses. The norm is telling people who are using their art to cope with past trauma that they're endorsing and supporting the trauma that they're depicting. The norm is telling these people that they should stop expressing themselves entirely because they're making others uncomfortable. And that, my friends, is often born from ableism. To illustrate my point, I want to use the specific example of self-harm. So, I'm not just commenting on this topic from the standpoint of an outside observer, but as someone who has actually experienced a lot of this type of criticism firsthand. For those of you who might be unaware, I am an artist who primarily draws yami kawaii morute art that quite often features self-inflicted scars and, other mental health topics. I am not alone in this at all. Many artists in the creepy cute community do the same thing and draw scars on their characters. Many artists, like myself, are people who have suffered from real-life self-harm issues and mental health problems. We draw our scars on our characters to express our pain safely through fiction, and the cute, close pastel colors, sometimes sexual themes, and other appealing details about the art are there not to beautify the act of self-harm, but to contrast it, to depict how people cover up and ignore pain. It's basically vent art. And you know what kinds of things that people have said about me and others who do such a thing? They say things like, we support self-harm, that we think that people should do it, that so much as acknowledging it and choosing to show it means that our pain isn't real, that drawing cute characters with scars means that we're glorifying the act that got them those scars, that we're making others who have suffered from such issues look bad, and other things like that. People say all of those things without even taking a moment, not even a second, to actually consider how horrible accusing mentally ill people of supporting their trauma is. Even outside of that horrible aspect, the criticism itself is oftentimes ableist on its own. For example, when people say that drawing sexy or cute or beautiful characters with scars or mental health issues is not okay. Are you there in saying that people who have scars or have suffered or who have mental illnesses can't ever be sexy or beautiful? As someone who has self-harmed and who has felt like damaged goods and like I'm ugly because of it, I find it highly offensive and not at all supportive to imply that. You in the audience, just because you've harmed yourself or are suffering or have suffered does not mean that you're ugly or unworthy of love and intimacy, nor does it mean that you're broken. Depicting characters as beautiful in spite of their pain is not the same as saying that their pain is aspirational. On the other hand, people say that depicting self-harm and mental illnesses as painful or difficult is bad and demonizes people who suffer from it. Hunty, sweaty, baby grill. Sometimes mental illness is painful. Sometimes mental illnesses are scary. Sometimes mentally ill people are spurred into doing bad or impulsive things because of the way that their mental illness or past trauma warps their perceptions of themselves, others, and the world around them. I'm speaking from experience there, actually. Portraying mental illness as difficult and painful, or some mentally ill characters as bad, is not the same as saying that everyone with mental health issues is evil or terrible or unstable. Calm down. The worst thing about it is that I've gotten both of these criticisms in relation to the same pieces of art or the same characters before, and I know that a lot of others probably have too. Again, these statements are contradictory. People point to one thing and then say that it's romanticizing and glorifying, and in the same breath point at that same thing and say that it's demonizing and condemning. Which is it then? Well, truly, the answer is usually neither. Finally, bringing this back around to censorship, many people will say that this kind of art is not okay because it makes people uncomfortable. People like to say that seeing this art may trigger people or cause certain people to relapse in terms of self-harm, and because of that, it shouldn't be allowed to exist. It's the whole think of the fragile people and the children argument. And you know what I have to say to that? Clutch your pearls harder, you fucking Karen. I'm going to be touching on this in more detail in a later section, but it is no artist's responsibility to remove their artwork because it triggers people. It is the viewer's responsibility to recognize what makes them uncomfortable and to remove themselves from communities and spaces where that kind of content is shared. This whole argument is like walking into an R-rated movie and demanding that the violence and language be censored because you brought your child in with you. Like, Gorge, Baby Grill, you chose to come in here with the kid. Nobody has to accommodate them in a space that is not made for them. It is your responsibility to leave. I also want to point out that this "they could get triggered and relapse" argument is often misinformed. There's this weird idea that if you talk about self-harm and mental illness, it inherently causes it to happen more or something, and while I acknowledge that there are likely a lot of people who have seen self-harm in media that they've watched and then relapsed, I also want to point out that not talking about mental illness and self-harm causes it to happen a lot more than acknowledging it. While I can't speak for everyone, self-harm is very often a result of feeling ignored and alone. People who hurt themselves feel out of control, unseen and unheard, so they inflict their mental pain onto their physical body so that it can be more widely recognized by others. It's a cry for help, essentially, a desperate plea for their pain to be seen as real and then treated as such. Ironically, this whole belief that shirking away from the discussion of self-harm and mental illness protects people from it is actually sometimes what causes it to happen or even to worsen. So not only is demanding censorship under the guise of protecting people entitled and very anti-art, but it's also not even valid a lot of the time. I hope that you are now starting to understand why this kind of criticism, hard quotation marks there, pisses me off so much and why I feel that it's very ableist. Restricting mentally ill people from expressing themselves and their experiences through their own artwork is highly inappropriate. Saying that they're being mentally ill in the quote-unquote wrong way is inappropriate. Saying that their work needs to be censored and not allowed to exist because it makes others uncomfortable is inappropriate. I want to take a moment to circle back around to the discussion of censorship based on the comfort, or rather the discomfort, of others. It is valid and understandable to be uncomfortable or hurt by certain types of things. It is not shameful or even at all your fault for seeing a piece of media and being triggered by it. It is valid to have a response to something that reminds you of past trauma or otherwise upsets you. Similarly, I also want to clarify that I feel no sort of ill will nor superiority to people who might just simply dislike dark themes. If your style and taste in art is cute anime girls staring at the camera, then that's great, and you should create and seek out artwork that appeals to your tastes. However, just like it's not a problem that you don't like dark themes, it's not a problem that others do like them. It is not the artist's fault or responsibility to censor work that triggers you either. As long as the artist in question is including content warnings or otherwise posting their art on their own personal platforms, it is not their responsibility to censor their artwork for anyone. With that being said, I want to also include a sort of rule of thumb and call to action for you all here. You do not have to tolerate content that triggers or discomforts you in your space, but you do have to tolerate its existence. Basically what I mean by that is that you should do this thing called the don't like, don't watch. Now, I already see you scrolling down to post a comment about how the whole don't like, don't watch argument is stupid or whatever, but before you do, let me just say that I do not think that said argument applies to media criticism. Again, I think that it's perfectly fine and cool, actually, to engage with media in a critical manner, and the whole don't like, don't watch argument is unequivocally stupid in that context. However, when it comes to censorship, it heavily applies. If your criticism is simply thing bad, or that thing triggers or upsets me, then may I suggest that you do not engage with it, baby grill? You do not have to tolerate stuff that offends your sensibilities in your space. What you should do is hit the block button, disengage, ignore. Don't cancel or harass, don't make a call out on some rando because their art upsets you, don't you dare open your mouth and spout some ableist bullshit about how portraying people with self-harm scars or mental illnesses is glorifying it or whatever the hell, simply ignore it. We as a community really have to destigmatize the whole idea of just ignoring things that you don't like and using the block button. There's this weird idea that blocking people you don't like means that you're afraid of them or some shit, but I tossed out the trash because it was stinking up my area and throwing off my groove, not because I'm afraid of it. So my call to action here is just fucking block people who make stuff that offends your sensibilities, including me actually. If my videos, if my art, if whatever about me upsets you, triggers you, discomforts you, or even so much as irritates you, then block me. Ignore me. You don't have to post comments telling me to KMS because I'm a tran or something, just leave, it's really easy. Filter out your online space, you don't need to tolerate people or content that you don't like in it. However, you do have to tolerate them existing in their space, and you have no right to invade it and insist that they stop doing the things that they love. To conclude, mental health topics and dark themes in art in general are completely fine and have a right to exist. Pro-shitters and antis are both kind of stupid and wrong because the presence of dark themes does not always equate to endorsement, but sometimes it very well can. Demanding censorship when the content is not illegal is incredibly anti-art, and the reasoning behind that demand in reference to mental health content is often either contradictory or comes from a place of ableism, whether unintentional or intentional. Maybe instead of harassing and canceling mentally ill people, just trying to create things that help them cope with trauma and their issues, just block them if what they make upsets you. And there you have it. Thank you all for watching if you got to the end of this video. I was kind of passionate in it, I know. Maybe write a comment if you have any thoughts or opinions or questions for me. Remember that all of my socials and my Ko-Fi are linked in the description if you want to support me. I still have commissions open if you're interested in ordering one. I hope you all have a nice rest of your day, and I will now bid you all adieu.